Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Father-Son Packers podcast, your source for Packers news, notes, and analysis. My name is Tommy, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, my dad, Matt. Dad, how you doing?
Doing good. We are on Combine Testing Eve as we record this, so exciting things coming up soon.
Yeah, very exciting things coming up soon. We are here recording the evening of Wednesday, February 28th, right before, I guess, Combine interviews have already started, so you could say the Combine has already started.
But Combine testing is about to start.
The meat of the Combine is just coming up, and we are here today to talk to you a little bit about the Combine, some things to watch for, what drills are most important for each position. We also have some interviews for both Brian Gutekunst and, since the last time we spoke, Jeff Hafley finally got introduced officially as DC, and we got to see his interview, so we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. But Dad, are you excited for the Combine? Are you ambivalent about the Combine? I personally enjoy it because, you know, it's some kind of football, and I am in football withdrawal at this point. I mean, at this point, we are, you know, what is it, 3 weeks out from the Super Bowl, 2 weeks out from the Super Bowl? Feels like the season was an eon ago. It feels like it's been tons of time. But yeah, Dad, how are you feeling about the Combine coming up? Are you excited for draft season? We've been doing mock draft Mondays on our Twitter. I mean, I'm fully in draft fever mode, and we got a month and a half to go.
Oh, yeah.
How are you feeling?
I do a couple mock drafts a day. Multiple mock drafts, more than a couple.
I was going to say, two feels like a low estimate for you.
Couple is a loosely used word. But what I'm excited about more for the Combine really is just the data. I don't think I'm really going to watch any of it because I tried to watch this some before. I was like, I just don't want to wait so long for the results, so I'll just get it all at once.
That's totally fair. And definitely, you know, they always say the most important part of the Combine is the part that's not actually, you know, visible to the general public, which is like the interviews and the medicals. But it is nice to see.
And then,
you know,
other stuff is going on at the NFL Combine as well, as in there's probably a whole lot of
wheeling and dealing.
Not yet wheeling and dealing, legal, not legal tampering.
Oh yeah, the tampering period is. I mean, they're like, oh, we're just having discussions. It's like, yeah, no, I wouldn't be surprised if we see maybe, you know, some tag and trade stuff this coming week with some players being tagged a little earlier than expected. But yeah, it's all the good fun of the Combine. But before we get into talking any more about, you know, the interviews, like we said, and the Combine, like we said, just wanted to pitch a couple of things. If you like what you hear today, come give us a follow on Twitter at FatherSonPacker. We tweet out when we have new episodes out, stats that we find interesting when we're researching for these episodes, articles we find interesting. We're doing mock draft Mondays every single Monday if you want to check those out there as well. Tweet out work from other Packers content creators that we find interesting, trying to, you know, just one-stop shopping for everything Titletown. And then subscribe to us on your podcast platform of choice, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We put all our episodes out on YouTube as well if you want to check us out there. If you subscribe to us on YouTube, it would really help our numbers, so we'd really appreciate that. But yeah, Dad, let's start talking Combine. Before we do, though, just a couple of Packers notes. We actually have a good amount of Packers-related news, surprisingly, for this time in the cycle. I'm just going to run through it really quick. The first is not Packers related, but we officially have a number for the cap, for the salary cap this year for 2024. It's higher than expected. It's going to be $255.4 million, which means that the Packers unexpectedly will actually come in below the salary cap. It was kind of expected that the Packers were going to be just a touch over, but it's looking like we're going to be below by $8 million, and that was before any moves were made. So we came in, as soon as that cap number was announced, we're going to be below it by $8 million. So that gives the Packers a little extra space to operate, which is always good. Beyond that, Dad, we have a couple of salary moves already made by the Packers as we're kind of getting closer and closer to the new year. The first was they restructured Rashawn Gary, and these numbers are per Ken Ingalls, at Ken Ingalls on Twitter. He's a great follow for Packers cap-related things. They restructured $6.375 million of Rashawn Gary's base salary and roster bonus into signing bonus and spread that out over 4 years. Long story short, they saved about $4.8 million against the cap in 2024 without adding any void years, so don't need to worry about any of the math there. But saving almost $5 million against the cap in 2024. And then today, they restructured Preston Smith. These numbers are per Ken Ingalls and Tom Silverstein of the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel. He actually took a pay cut. This is his second pay cut he's taken with the Packers, so shout out Preston Smith, real Packer for life right there. And the Packers are going to save $2.4 million against the cap in 2024, and he's going to add a few more incentives to his contract. So if he hits 10 sacks in 2024, according to Tom Silverstein, he'll be getting $4 million extra. But they are saving money against the cap here in 2024. So between the two moves, they're saving around $7-ish million, which, is a decent amount of money, essentially doubling the cap space they already had.
Here's me crossing my fingers that Preston earns that $4 million.
Yes, exactly. So it's like, hey, if he earns that $4 million, that's great for the Packers. 10 sacks, like, we'll take that any day of the week. I'll spend $4 million of not my money on 10 sacks any day of the week.
How are you spending $4 million?
Of not, hey, as a Packers owner, that's
as a Packers
amount, right?
Owner decision.
Yes, of course. As an owner, I can say that we would gladly part with $4 million if we get 10 sacks out of
Packers money for Preston.
Yeah, so those are the two restructures, and then we have 3 more moves on the coaching staff, and these numbers are per Paul Brettle's Substack, and then Paul Brittle on Packers Wire. Great follow, check him out at Paul_Brettle on Twitter. They have hired Eddie Gordon as an offensive line assistant. He was formerly UAB's O-line coach, and before that, he was an assistant at Georgia. So he's going to be an offensive line assistant. They also hired Sean Duggan as I believe it's Duggan and not Dugan, but it could be Dugan. My apologies if I mispronounced that. As a defensive assistant, he was the linebacker coach from 2020 to 2022, and then co-DC in 2023 at Boston College under Hafley. So he has experience working under Hafley. And then finally, this was actually just announced like 15 minutes before we started recording. But they hired Anthony Perkins as an assistant defensive backs coach. He was the defensive coordinator and defensive backs coach at Oregon State for the last 2 years. And before that, he was the cornerbacks coach at Colorado State. So mostly experience at the college ranks, but exciting to bring him in. Some, more fresh faces on the defensive group coaching staff, Dad. And I think that's something we're excited about, right?
Yes, I'm really looking forward to seeing a kind of a different attitude, not even a scheme, but like style and attitude in the secondary under Hafley.
Yeah, and style and attitude and new energy and new ideas. It definitely felt like things were just getting a little bit stale. But speaking of those new energy and ideas, Dad, we have not talked since Hafley's introductory presser, and you went through it and broke down what you thought about it, some things that you found interesting in it. Do you want to take it away?
Yeah, so he had a number of points that he, in response to questions that he made. And so his reasons for coming to Green Bay, he specifically mentioned wanting to join LaFleur. And even though he hadn't worked with him before, but kind of worked with people who'd worked with him. And so they had contacts through other people. And he was excited about how well he'd been doing lately and about the team that Gutekunst has put together. He specifically mentioned how they overcame adversity this year after that losing streak and then recovering and having a good year. And that Green Bay and that Lambeau is the mecca of football.
He sure knows how to, if nothing else, pander to the fan base. And let me tell you, I was eating it up. I was 100% eating it up for sure. I mean, he had me hook, line, and sinker. I can't lie.
He was getting everybody riled up. Yeah, in terms of like people say, he won the press conference. He talked about his core beliefs. He was asked about those. It kind of, in some ways, summarized as put the players in the best position to succeed, regardless of the scheme. So he talked about whether you're doing 4-3, 3-4, whether you're in nickel, and make it simple for the players so they can play fast and don't have to hesitate while they're thinking about what they should do. He talked about giving players the info they need so they can be fearless and play with their hair on fire, go get the ball and get hands on people. And that his core beliefs weren't going to change based on like moving from college to the NFL. And he said, well, I was in the NFL before. They gave me the same.
Yeah, the same thing in reverse. I remember he was
saying
in
reverse.
Yeah, because he coached in the pros. Can he coach in college? And he's like, now it's, well, he coached in college. Can he coach in the pros? He's like, I'm used to it. It is what it is.
Yeah, and so then another one of his core philosophies seems to be he wants the best ideas out there. Doesn't care where they come from. His experience as a head coach has made him more open to ideas from other people, the assistants, and also including players. And he mentioned learning plays and getting advice from players before, and like Richard Sherman, who has said good things about Hafley in the press as well. So that's something he's willing to, I think, let go of a little bit of ego and
Yeah, and I
this
think
is what's working. How are we going to implement it? This is what you see. Explain. And he also talked about wanting people to explain why they thought something was better, so that you could see it. And then, if he learns it that way, then it's going to be easy for him to explain to other people.
Yeah, and I think that lack of ego was also really evident in another comment he had where he was talking about, he's like, look, just because I'm the defensive coordinator doesn't mean I'm like, I can't just expect these guys to respect me as soon as I walk into the room. He's like, that has to be earned, both me to the players and the players to me. Like it's like a growing relationship type thing where like, et cetera. Like he clearly seemed to understand. It's like, hey, like I'm not just Mr. Big Shot because I'm the defensive coordinator now. Like they've all been here longer than me. Like I need to like earn their respect and they need to earn mine, and we need to get used to each other and learn what works between like us and them, and whatever ideas, wherever they might come from, like whatever is best for the Packers is best for us. So I thought that was really awesome. And yeah, he definitely, like, answering these questions, like you could tell he was a head coach before. Like he has extensive experience with the media for sure.
Yeah. Just right. How to like talk about the big picture and connect with people and kind of command the press conference. He also mentioned what he's looking for a safety. This was actually in some ways kind of a funny moment. He says, yeah, I want a guy who can erase things, get a guy down, finish off at the pile, get interceptions, can communicate, go man. And I guess I just described the perfect player. It's like, yeah, that's what I want.
No, that was really funny when he was talking about that post safety. And I do think, like,
what he wants is post safety.
He's like, yeah, no, he has to be able to tackle. He has to be able to take the ball away. He has to be able to close. He needs to be the last line of defense. He needs to be able to play man coverage. He needs to be able to play that deep. It's like, okay, so he needs to be able to do everything. But I think the more I heard him like say about the demands of that position, the more convinced I am that they're going to try and add someone at that spot in free agency, because that, number one, the player he describes is not on the roster. Number two, I think it would be kind of overambitious to expect a rookie to come in right away, especially in a safety class that's just so-so, but a rookie to come in right away and fulfill all of those requirements. So that specific answer I found the most interesting of all of them when he was asked what like he needs at that safety position, because it was like, okay, so you're going to need to bring in a vet then, because there's no way anyone at like purely just drafted or on the roster is going to be able to do that, right?
Yeah, the other thing, it's interesting you talk about this safety class not being regarded that highly. It makes two in a row that aren't generally thought of as not being that good. And is that just a blip? Is that a trend? What's going on here?
I think it's a trend, honestly. And I think that, these top level athletes aren't playing safety as much anymore also. It's not paid as much as corners, not paid as much as, receiver. And also, it seems like every year the free agency market, you see we brought in Amos like several years ago. You see the Falcons last year bring in Jesse Bates, have a lot of success there, and that there seem to be free agents available at the safety position each year. And we looked at this class and we talked about it a couple episodes ago, talking about Xavier McKinney being, actually I think it was just this last episode, talking about Xavier McKinney, Cameron Curl, Antoine Winfield, Geno Stone. The list goes on, but there should be it's a pretty strong free agency class of safeties, while it's not necessarily the strongest draft class of safeties.
And it has been something that you can get a good safety on the free agent market the last few years without it being that much of a cap hit, because the market for safeties is kind of depressed.
Exactly.
As are, I assume, the safeties themselves.
And I think, part of the depression of the market of safeties is kind of a function of, the large amount of too high being played in the league, where there's a lot less demand at each safety, given the fact that they only need to play half the field and they're mostly playing deep. They don't need to man up as much. And so you can get by with substandard safety play when you have a ton of too high coverage and not as much, range demanded of your safeties. And so that's probably, I think, just a function of the trend of the defense. And, maybe with teams trending away from that too high stuff, maybe safety will come back in vogue and start getting paid higher. You never know.
It'll be more. Yeah. So when you have it schemed so that the level of an individual single player does not make that much difference between, say, having the best versus the 10th best.
Yeah. That's just
inherently when that scheme changes.
Yeah.
So that there's a bigger difference in how the team performs when you have that difference in talent level, then the price tag is going to start going back up again.
Yeah. So I think, with maybe teams moving away from that too high. We might see, safeties getting paid a little bit more going forward in the next 5 years, but only time will tell. Dad, anything else you wanted to add on Halfley's presser, or should we start talking about the combine and what Gutekunst had to say on Monday?
Okay, I just will touch on a few more things about. He really is emphasizing like teaching, so stressed keeping in mind what players can learn and not giving them too much and overload them, and then blame the players. So he says specifically that that's not good coaching. So he's, and then he said something about personality. So there won't be a lot of yelling, but a lot of. Somebody actually asked about yelling, saying no. Now we will have yelling, but a lot of coaching. Be demanding, but not demeaning. Being cerebral is good, but need energy on the field. But he and his staff are not going to motivate through fear. You got to push the players, but want what's best for them and make sure they know that you want what's best for them.
Yeah, I thought that the part he was saying that you were just saying prior to that, where he was like, I could have like this super complex defense where there are all these checks and there are all these like, you do this if this happens and you do this if this happens, and it's got everything covered. And then the players go out there and they like can't do it because it's too complicated. And then I can just be like, well, we didn't execute. Like I had the right scheme, but the players didn't, go out and execute. He's like, I could just say that, but that's bad coaching too. Like, the coaching isn't just about a scheme. It's about teaching the players your scheme. And if your scheme is too complicated for players to execute, then what are we even do? Like, what's the point? And I thought that was a very refreshing take from him.
Talked about this before. As a coach, you are a teacher. You're teaching your players what you want them to play and how to do it. And if one player fails, okay, that's the player's fault. If there are many players on the field who don't know what they're supposed to do, that's a coaching problem. It's nothing to do with scheme. It's about how you play and how you've been taught how to play. And so when people talk about whether one coach's scheme is bad, that's only a small part of the coaching picture.
100%. But yeah, no, I was really overall, just to wrap up Halfley, I was psyched. I think he, obviously none of this matters until they take the field in September, or like prior to that also, I guess, in camp and stuff. And nothing matters until we see what they put on the field. And the only thing that matters is what they put on the field. But it's better to have a good press conference than a bad press conference. So, for now, it's positive signs. And I think he really nailed that first presser.
Yeah, he did a great job. He really got, I think everybody who actually watched was like, oh man, I'm fired up. Can we start now?
Yeah, no, and I think it's a welcome change in energy on the defensive side. But Dad, moving on to the combine now, the meat of our episode, what we really wanted to talk about. Oh,
do you want to talk about one more thing? Presser first, or do you want to?
Well, I'm considering the Gutekunst presser as part of the combine. So I just wanted to read off for our listeners.
That's true. It wasn't the combine.
Yeah, I just wanted to read off for our listeners the schedule of the combine really quick. So on Monday, Brian Gutekunst spoke for 45 minutes to local reporters, and then spoke for another 15 minutes to national media. But just before we get into that, just wanted to go over the schedule of the combine for those of you at home who might not be familiar. Tomorrow, Thursday, February 29th, is going to be the defensive linemen and linebackers doing drills. So linebackers, definitely something you might want to keep an eye on, as the Packers are definitely in need at that position. On Friday, it will be defensive backs and tight ends. That's Friday, March 1st. On Saturday, it'll be quarterbacks, wide receivers, and running backs. Keep an eye on those running backs for sure, because I think the Packers are almost guaranteed to add one. And then on Sunday, it'll be offensive linemen to finish it all up. And that will be the end of combine testing. So keep your eye on all of that. But Dad, like I was saying, on Monday, Brian Gutekunst spoke at the Combine in Indianapolis. Did he say anything interesting? Was it a lot of platitudes? I think yes and yes. What'd you have for us? What stood out to you from that
so
interview?
Especially the video that was the 15 minutes with the national media. I think that it was a little heavier on the platitudes, but so you get a little insight in some of what he had to say there. So people were talking about whether asked him about the transfer, what he thought about the transfer portal, whether the broader experience in terms of schemes players were getting exposed to was a good thing or a bad thing. And it's kind of a general philosophy that Gutekunst really thought it's important for players to know a scheme very well, especially quarterbacks, to be able to play well. And that seems to be a core philosophy of his. And that to scout players to see whether they fit into the team culture or not, that they like to follow players for several years. And that is harder now with the transfer portal because they are now, switching from one scheme to another and new environment to another.
Yeah, and he mentioned, like, he was comparing it to, he's like, yes, I see what you're saying about them learning multiple different things, but if you have a player come in as a rookie and they have 3 different offensive coordinators in their first 3 years, we hardly ever see those players succeed. And he's like, so I think it's kind of similar at the college level. I was like, yeah, that's a good point, actually. It's like, it's you usually need multiple years in a scheme to really know what you're doing out there.
You hear that a lot for players. Like, you get some accident forgiveness, as it were, if you've had multiple coordinators early in your career. He mentioned something about, he was asked about what he thought about players opting out of cognitive testing and how that affects evaluation. And he had so I guess the Packers have their own cognitive test as well as what the NFL does. And he says they generally use it to figure out how to support a player on the team rather than whether or not to draft somebody.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more about how they
learn, it looked like to me, like what they were good at. Yeah. And I was like, okay, that was actually really interesting, because it's like, a lot of people, like you said, are opting out of testing because of last year, the S2 scores got leaked and CJ Stroud's was really, really bad. And a lot of people were talking about that. There was a talking point for like a good 3 weeks or so about like, oh, like if his S2 scores are bad, do teams really want to take a chance on it? And, I think it worked out pretty well for the Texans. If I'm sure they would do it back again, it was like 100 times out of 100.
It certainly benefited them that leaked out.
Yeah, but so it turns out that a lot of players have already decided this year that they're not going to be doing some of those tests. So, but yeah, and the fact that he was saying is like, it's not really an evaluation so much as it is telling us what to do with the player. And he was actually saying even for the players that won't be taking it, they'll be having them take it after they're drafted by the Packers, which I was like, okay, that's pretty interesting.
Yes, it's like the team doesn't use it as a filter, but more as a tool to figure out how best to help players succeed. Then he talked a little bit about what he thought about Jordan Love's year, that I really liked how steady it was in the tough stretch in October, and that he wasn't surprised by anything, but was pleased to see how well he handled the adversity, and was really pleased to see how the team rallied around it. What he thought about the personnel change at the coaching staff and the change in defensive scheme and how that might impact any decisions they make. He said he's still just getting to know Halfley now, but the emphasis is on play standards and play style. He feels like they want to have more good players. They want to improve the competition within all of the position rooms on offense and defense, and emphasize several times his presser about competition in those rooms and how much it helped the team last year on offense. And he also said that the foundation of what Green Bay looks for in players won't change. How Halfley wants to play he said something about have a factor at the final decision, but Gutekunst stressed that they want versatile guys, and that it seems like Gutekunst's philosophy is to have guys who are versatile so they can switch to other positions in case of injury. The next thing he talked about was he was asked about whether the salary cap increase will affect their overall offseason plans. And all he said was that it gives them some flexibility in contract structure.
Well, to me, that part was actually interesting because the full quote that I heard was, it's just about flexibility. And then he said, it doesn't change like our plans for like how we want to go about acquiring people. And the way I kind of butchered the exact quote, but the way he said like their plans, it seemed like the way that he said it, they already had plans of acquiring players. And so that kind of makes me think that they are perhaps going to be more of a player in free agency. That, like I said with the Halfley thing, and maybe it's just wishful thinking, totally could be. I'm still, obviously mostly a fan, but and obviously want them to just add good players because those are always more fun to watch. But it did make me think, that the way he said it is like, I don't think it changes the way that we were going to go about acquiring players. Makes me think that that along with, the demands of the safety, and then along with them freeing up cap space already, makes me think they're going to try and be players in free agency more so than they've been in the past few years. So, and the fact that, they just don't have safeties and linebackers on the roster right now.
They've been, increasing their salary cap room. And so it seems like they have a plan.
Ideas and plans.
They have ideas.
But so that quote was interesting to me. The fact that the way he phrased it made it seem like they were already looking at acquiring players. But, March 11th, I guess we'll see when free agency opens. But sorry, that continued.
Yeah, and so then there were some other quotes that weren't in the national media. So from Tom Silverstein, Gutekunst said that at the combine that a decision on Bakhtiari will be made before the start of free agency in March. So and that'll be before his surgically repaired knee is fully recovered. I think there was also a quote regarding Bakhtiari as well from Rob Domofsky about how he might not be ready until training camp.
Yeah, that was the one that I saw as well.
They'll be making a decision on Bakhtiari, it sounds like, before he's ready to get on the field. So that coming up in just a couple weeks. So not much is going to change between now and then, unless like what changes is Bakhtiari willing to take some big pay cut or something. Yeah. Otherwise, I don't know what could possibly be changed.
Because cutting him, it's $20 million, if I remember correctly.
It's about 20. It's 20, maybe 20 and a bit. But it's about half of his salary cap hit, and none of that salary is guaranteed. None of that salary is in bonuses, if I remember correctly. So that's a big thing that's coming soon.
It's coming down the pipe, it looks like, and it's unfortunate, but I think it's looking more and more with every day that he's probably going to end up getting cut.
Especially if they say that's what I think when he says it's coming up so quickly, they're making a decision that soon that it's going to probably not going to be good news for Bakhtiari staying in Green Bay.
Yeah.
And also there was a report of Russ Ball is going to be meeting with agents for Aaron Jones and many others. Some of the others may have been these restructures that have already happened since Monday.
Yeah, and two other players that are probably going to get restructured are Aaron Jones and Kenny Clark, although we might see Kenny get an extension. We'll see. Because both of their cap hits for 2024 are pretty high. And then, Gutekunst also, I'm assuming Russ Ball is also meeting with Jordan Love's agents because that contract is coming up quick.
Yeah, and there's some quotes that Matt Schneidman passed along on that. He says from Gutekunst, I'm sure I'll see Love's agents while we're here, meaning at the combine.
Did you see what Spotrac had as his estimated contract?
You told me there was basically $50 million a year.
Yeah, it was 4-year, $200 million. So that would make him around the fourth highest paid quarterback if that was like his actual contract. It'd be right behind Jalen Hurts and right ahead of Kyler Murray. So, I mean, I'd be fine with it. I think he more than earned it.
Well, in terms of that position, that seems fair.
Yeah, I mean, he played really well. He did his time. Sat behind Aaron Rodgers, learned, worked hard, was the leader they needed this year, took him to the playoffs, played excellent in the playoffs. And, I think he more than deserved that contract. So, write the check. Let's do it. Yep.
And so in terms of where we think he slots in the league, sort of between Hurts and Murray doesn't seem out of the ordinary.
Yeah, it doesn't seem unreasonable at all. But Gutekunst definitely had some other interesting things to talk about during that 45 minutes with the local press. I think they must have been digging harder than the national media because the national media was throwing him some softballs, but we got some real answers from him in the local media section.
Yeah, he also had something to say about Anders Carlson. That said that there's going to need to be a curve of getting better if that's going to continue. Now that is that's like a threatening statement in certain movie circles.
That's like ominous. That was like an ominous
that's
quote.
Like, I don't know when you read that, it's like, oh yeah, that's like an ominously threatening quote if this was like if he was a movie villain.
Yeah, no, and the thing is, like, we don't have like the video or the audio of it, so we don't know like with what tone it was said. But the way that if that's going to continue if that's going to continue is written is, buddy.
Did Thanos say this?
Yeah, and it makes you wonder, like, are we ever drafting a kicker or a punter ever again under Gutekunst? Maybe not, and that's maybe not a bad thing.
Right. Some of what you looked at. And then about Rasheed Walker, can he be in starting left tackle in the league? And his quote was, I certainly think he's already shown that.
That was very interesting to me.
If that's how he feels about Walker's play, then that also leads you to think that they're not going to take the risk of having hope that Bakhtiari is healthy enough to play next year.
Well, to me, it kind of changes how I might view what they're looking at with that first round pick. Because up to this point, a lot of the mock drafts that I've been doing, it's like looking at guys like Fautanu, looking at guys like Graham Barton, looking at guys like Jordan out of Arizona, looking at guys like Amarius Mims if he falls out of Georgia. But if he feels confident in Rasheed Walker to that extent at left tackle 1, maybe he doesn't view left tackle as a major need for this offensive line. And if you're not looking at a tackle in the first round, you're probably not taking a guard in the first round. So, I think that might change how I view their draft strategy. And, maybe we're coming up right on lying season. We're right
coming
there.
up on.
That's
coming
true.
up on.
I view
we're in the middle of it.
That's true. Once the combine starts, it is officially lying season. So fair enough.
That ends in Y.
Also, yes, but so no. So I did think that Walker quote was probably the most interesting thing that he said during this section. It's like, okay, so they like Walker a good amount, and he played pretty dang well last year, to be honest. I mean, he's not the best run blocker, but his pass protection was quite good. Anything else from Goody in this segment?
And then the last thing is that he thinks that we will always like to have one power back, a bigger back on the roster for short yardage situations and playing in the weather and closing out games. And so to that, I thought my first reaction when I heard that was they're going to draft Braylon Allen.
Mine was they're going to draft Audric Estime out of Notre Dame. So we had very similar thoughts. What are your thoughts on that as a philosophy, though? I don't love it.
It's a little bit of old school thinking.
That's what it is to me, because it's like, sure,
we just want to pound him into submission, but you actually have I'd have to look at the data in more detail, but if I remember what we've talked about before, that Aaron Jones is actually better in a lot of short yard situations than bigger backs.
Oh, then Dylan, 100%. I mean, they're trying to essentially do with Dylan, but successfully. And Dylan's a fine player, but not like a second round pick worthy player. But I mean, Aaron Jones has been the better short yardage back the entire time both of them have been there. So I don't really understand. I don't understand the feel for the need for Thunder and Lightning. Let's just get two good backs. I mean, if he happens to be bigger, that's fine.
Can we get two Lightning bolts?
Yeah, it's like if we had two Aaron Joneses, is anyone going to complain because they're both small? I don't think so.
This is the thing that they need to think about more. It's like, okay, Aaron Jones' style of play, his skill set works really well. Why don't we keep getting that?
Why not have two of them? Why not have three of them?
And when he misses games, the offense suffers tremendously. So why not look for players with that skill set instead of a complementary? Just get the best.
When you're looking for a complementary back, that guy probably, at least what we saw with Dylan, is he was not able to be the lead back. He was fine as a complementary inning eater, but like you said, the offense was way worse when Jones didn't play. What if you had a guy who could just do the Jones things if Jones misses time, which, he missed over half the games this past year and was hurt for several of them. So, you can't expect him to be healthy. He's turning 30 next December. So I don't really get it. There are fine, bigger backs in this class. So, that's the thing is, I'm not saying that a bigger back is bad. I'm just saying you shouldn't limit yourself. You just take a good running back. Just because Bucky Irving is small from Oregon, doesn't mean you shouldn't take him. And that doesn't mean that Estime or Braylon Allen might not be really good. But don't be we can't take him because Jones is small and we don't want a second small guy. It's no, just take a good second back so we have two good running backs and we can have a good running back on the field all the time. Because you know how mad people would get when they see Aaron Jones trot to the sideline and another running back come in? It wasn't because it was don't. It
was just why are you taking Jones out now?
We're
doing great.
Is just don't feel it's you can't take a good back because they're not a good fit next to Jones or something. I think that's not the best thinking, but it is what Gutekunst said, and it is something to just keep in mind when you're trying to project what the Packers are going to do in the draft. Is he says they want a bigger back next to Jones, so that's what they're going to probably try and do.
Yes, and if you feel like the Packers are doing decisions in terms of who they're putting in the game to frustrate you, then sure.
Probably. Maybe.
It's always
Honestly,
personal.
It could be. But anyway, Dad, anything left on Gutekunst's presser that you wanted to touch on? I thought
I think
he gave
those
us
are the main points. Yeah, there are actually, especially the quotes that came out from the local media, some interesting tidbits in there.
Yeah, okay. Well, let's start talking about the Combine itself then, because I have some interesting things that I wanted to talk about. But specifically for the Combine with the Packers, it is, I think, more important for Green Bay than for other organizations because Green Bay, especially under Brian Gutekunst, have just loved elite athletes. And these numbers are from Paul Brettel on PackersWire.com. If you're not familiar with relative athletic score, it's essentially a way of capturing athleticism and controlling for size. So, it's the idea that, a 6'5", 290-pound guy running a 4.6 is more impressive than a 6', 180 guy running a 4.3. It's kind of that idea. So it's controlling for size and at the position. But these numbers are from Paul Brettel, like I said on Packers Wire. Since 2018, when Brian Gutekunst took over, he has made 61 draft picks, with 54 of them registering on the RAS scale. Of those 54 picks, 40 have had a RAS of at least 8, including 25 scoring above a 9.0. Just 10 of those selections have been below a 7, with only 2 of them, Amari Rodgers and Jaden Reed, being top 100 selections, and then the other 8 were day 3 picks. So keep an eye on the combine this week, because guys who test really well are more likely to be Packers than guys who don't test well. The Packers love their elite athletes, especially in the first round. Way like almost 2/3 of them are like above an 8, which is like an elite athlete, and then a third of them are uber elite athletes. So just keep that in mind. Guys like Lucas Van Ness, super elite athlete; Rashawn Gary, super elite athlete, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, down the line. So just keep that in mind. But what I wanted to look at today was I wanted to look at which combine drills were most important at each position. So I did a little bit of a project. So I was kind of looking at which ones, when I say most important, which ones correlated most to success at the NFL level. Now, the first step was, so I ended up using data from Pro Football Reference for the combine data, and then I used data from Spot Track for contract data. And you might be like, why contract data? So the first thing I had to do was, define what I wanted to say success at the NFL level was. And so what I used as a proxy for that was a player's second contract, the amount of total money that they got on their second contract. Now, first issue you might say is like, hey, like over time, like contracts increase in value. So how are you going to handle that? And so what I did to control for contract, and, contracts are different position to position, and that's totally right. So what I did to, normalize those contract values was I took each contract and I looked at every contract signed. And so I was looking at the total contracts, every contract signed from 2000 until now. And so for each player's second contract, I look at every contract signed at their position before that contract and normalized it. So, like a standard normal distribution, and looked at where it would fall in that normal distribution. So a Z-score is what that would be called. And looked at where it would fall, amongst all contracts signed at that position prior to that. So essentially, was it resetting the market, or where was it relative to the market at that time? So what I looked at then was essentially taking that normalized second contract value, and I looked at all players who participated in the combine from 2013 to 2023 who had signed a second contract. And I looked at how each of those combine testing numbers, so what Pro Football Reference has is height, weight, 40-yard dash, vertical, bench, broad jump, 3-cone, and shuttle, so 8 of those. And I looked at, for each position, which one had the highest correlation to that normalized second contract value. And so for each position, I kind of use that. It's kind of a little bit simple, just looking at correlation and not looking at some kind of linear regression amongst all the variables. You could do something more complicated like that. But I just wanted to see which test or measurement or physical measurement had the highest correlation to that second contract value. And so for each position, I found that. So for quarterback, interestingly enough, it is the bench press, and it is actually negatively correlated. So the better you do on the bench, the worse you generally get in terms of second contract value. Now, what's actually probably happening here is there is a confounding factor in arm length. So players with shorter arms are better at the bench press, and so players with shorter arms are probably worse quarterbacks. So the shorter arms being better at the bench press, and then shorter arms being a worse quarterback because you're slightly smaller. It's probably what's happening there. But that was what it was for quarterback. Going down the list, tackle, the one that correlated the best was the short shuttle. So, the faster you ran the short shuttle, the better you ended up getting value-wise on your second contract, or the better tackle you were at the NFL level over your first contract. So that was the short shuttle for tackles.
Yeah, and so listeners, this is something that's actually been talked about in Packers blogosphere, social media for a number of years now, that the Packers have been very interested in short shuttle testing. At the tackle position. And
guys like Zach Tom absolutely destroyed short shuttle. I believe John Runyon had a really good short shuttle time. That one I'm less sure about, but Zach Tom absolutely annihilated it. But it's generally, that one for tackles and for offensive linemen in general is a very useful one.
Yeah, and it turns out that what the Packers have been if Packers have been using that, and it seems like they have, it looks like it is borne out by the data league wide.
Yeah. Defensive end, the one that correlated the best was also the short shuttle. For cornerbacks, the one that correlated the best was broad jump. Now that kind of makes, some success or some sense. You want those short area explosive bursts. If you're a corner, you got to change direction really quickly, and that's generally what broad jump is meant to test for. For guard, this one was interesting to me. The 40-yard dash was actually what translated the best to, in terms of just what correlated the most to that second contract value, that normalized second contract value. For defensive tackles, it was the 3-cone. For inside linebackers, it was also the 40-yard dash, interestingly enough, which kind of makes sense in some instances. What's really in vogue right now in the league is those sideline-to-sideline players, and we see that with a lot of the top defenses. They need linebackers to be able to go sideline-to-sideline. For centers, interestingly enough, it was height. That was a bit of a surprise to me. That one, I think, is probably a little bit more just noise. As we get onto these ones, these are ones that are slightly less correlated. And to me, what that means is essentially athleticism is maybe less of a premium at these positions. For tight end, it was also the broad jump. Explosivity is also really important at that position. For safety, now we're getting down to these last three positions is a very low correlation in terms of one testing number to, that normalized second contract value. For safety, it was the bench. For running back, it was the 3-cone. And for wide receiver, it was the broad jump. And all of those were pretty low correlation values. So pretty much essentially that athleticism testing for those players is not as necessarily at a premium as it is for some of these other positions. When you're looking at it, though...
I just say it's interesting for the wide receiver. If you think they're the most correlated test, the broad jump, would I think fall in the sixth or the fifth most correlated test for tackles.
Yeah, tackle is definitely one where athleticism is at a premium.
Right. So just give the listener a little sense of how less the athletic testing is correlated with wide receiver success compared to tackle success.
Yeah. So just to rattle those off one more time, if you're watching the combine this week or looking at the numbers across the ticker, these are the ones that you want to look at for each position. Quarterback, the bench. Tackle, the short shuttle. Defensive end, the short shuttle. Cornerback group, the broad jump. Guard, the 40-yard dash. Defensive tackle, the 3-cone. Inside linebacker, the 40-yard dash. Tight end, the broad jump. Safety, the bench. Running back, the 3-cone. And wide receiver, the broad jump. Now, in terms of, I also did a quick little group by on position in terms of looking at the correlations for each of the testing for each position, and did that essentially to look at how important athletic testing was for each position. And what you end up with is athletic testing and measurables, so height and weight as well, are really important for quarterback, tackle, defensive tackle, outside linebacker, corner, and inside linebacker. And then the ones that it's really not as important for are or at least didn't correlate as much to that second contract and the amount that the league ended up valuing them, were wide receiver, running back, safety, tight end, center, and guard. Those are the ones where athletic testing was not necessarily at a premium in terms of looking at all athletic testing and the average of the absolute values of those correlations amongst all those athletic testings. So just something to keep in mind when you're watching the combine this week or when you're looking at those numbers. Some athletic testing and some drills matter more for certain positions than they do for others. And so I just wanted to do, a quick little simple correlation comparison, looking at how, over the course of that first contract success, which of those athletic measurables correlated to that. And I thought it was, kind of interesting. It might seem dry to some of you. Some of you might find it interesting. If only one of you finds it interesting, I'll count that as a win. It was fun for me to do, and I'll definitely be keeping that in mind when I'm looking at stuff. But also just to keep in mind these correlations, there's definitely a lot of noise there. It's not the biggest sample. Most of these were around 80 to 100 players, so not the most massive sample size. And the correlations were all nothing was a perfectly linear correlation. Most of them were around Pearson's R of around 0.3. So, a general trend, but nothing that's super duper substantial. You could probably get something more interesting if you looked at a combination, like a linear combination of each of the drills for each position. But that would just, I think be a little too in the weeds for an episode like this. And maybe this was a little too in the weeds for an episode like this, but I had fun doing it. But yeah, so just keep that in mind when you're looking at the combine. Just to wrap it up, some drills are more important than others. Dad, anything else you wanted to take away from that? I think, the one that really I was like, yeah, no, this makes sense, is the fact that the shuttle is really important for some of those bigger guys.
Yeah, he likes agility. You were talking about the guard for the 40, and I was thinking, well, maybe what really matters for the guard is like being able to get out of the second level and get those next level blocks. And so maybe speed matters for those guards trying to go upfield.
100%.
That's the thing that really gets valued.
Yeah. And Dad, I think we were just going to wrap it up here today, just talking about maybe 3 players each that we're keeping an eye on specifically at the Combine for what they do. I guess we can just go every other. Do you want to go first?
Yeah. So not surprising to you will be that I cheated in picking 3 players.
You did? Really?
So the first is I've got Edgerrin Cooper and other top linebackers like
okay. All right.
Colson from Michigan or Peyton Wilson. I want to see their 40 times. So I don't know which one. I'm going to be looking at the 40 times for those inside linebackers.
Yeah, and we saw, the 40 was the drill that correlated the most to that contract value for linebackers, and a linebacker's really important need. For me, so I think that's an excellent choice. For me, the first one that I listed was T'Vondre Sweat, is a player that, I'm very interested in for the Packers in that second round. He's a freak, but he did not weigh in at the Senior Bowl, presumably because he was probably a little too heavy. So I'm really curious to see what he weighs in at the Combine. Is he going to be over 360? That's what they listed him at Texas, and he didn't weigh in at the Senior Bowl. So you have to presume he was probably like 375 then. So I'm interested to see what he does there. Dad, what was your second player or group of players, since I guess you're just doing whatever you want over there?
It's off season.
True.
So I'm looking at possible slot corners, and ones I are kind of around when I think they could pick one in the maybe second rounders, depending on how they test. Jerrion Jones and Andrew Phillips. I want to see what their shuttle times are. This, I think, came out to be maybe the second most important trait for cornerbacks by your analysis. And I'm thinking maybe it's even more important in the slot. These are 2 guys who played a fair amount of slot reps in college and could be options for the Packers as a slot corner.
Totally see it. For me, the second one for me was also a corner. It was Ennis Rakestraw Jr., a guy that we've, mocked in the first round to the Packers several times. I want to see what he weighs in at also. But on the other side, Mizzou, I think, had him listed at just about like $185, $188.
Is it going to take 2 of him to be one T'Vondre Sweat?
2 of him might not even be one T'Vondre Sweat, honestly. But so I want to see if he comes in like over like 190. I would like to see him, over like 190, 192, I think would be, a better weight for him.
The Packers do seem to have a threshold of there for height and weight, maybe for corners. And so I'd be curious to see where he comes in on that.
Yeah. And who'd you have as your last one?
So the top safeties, really. Newbin, Kinchins. I'm also very curious to see Dadrian Taylor Demerson. He's a guy who's been coming up kind of late this year, and not even every site has him listed at all in their rankings. So I'm curious. I want to see how fast these safeties are. Last year, if you remember, was a fairly slow class in terms of 40 time for safeties. And I'm curious to see how these guys measure up.
Yep, definitely. And the Packers need safeties, they need slot corners, and they need linebackers.
You may have noticed I've stacked entirely on the defensive side.
I wouldn't be surprised if this was a very defensive heavy draft for the Packers. So I totally get that.
I've also stacked on positions I think they're going to take multiple of. I think they're going to take. It's a good chance they end up with 2 new linebackers. Maybe one will be a free agent. They're definitely going to have add at least 2 safeties.
Yes.
Maybe only 1 slot corner, but I think there could be, we could be double dipping at a couple of these spots.
Yeah. For me, the last one that I had was Troy Fautanu. He's a guy that, I would like in the first round to the Packers, although if they don't see left tackle as a need, maybe that's not going to happen. But I'm very interested in what his arm length is going to be. There's a lot of people saying he might move into guard and that he doesn't look the longest. Is he going to hit that threshold for arm length for tackles, or is he going to be a guy that's kind of pigeonholed into guard? If he's pigeonholed into guard, I could see him like falling a little bit, maybe, to the end of the first round, as opposed to seeing him mocked a lot of places more around like 16, 17, 18 right now. So that's just something I'm keeping my eye on. But anyway, Dad, anything last things you want to say about the
Well,
combine, or should we, wrap things up?
well, I would just say about Fautanu and other tackles like him that I think that's what the Packers might be looking for is a tackle that can move inside. But a player might have more like draft value if he has long enough arms to play both tackle and guard.
Yeah.
And so they need to be picked up earlier in the draft.
Yep. But anyway, this has been our Combine Prep episode. Keep an eye on us on Twitter at FatherSonPacker during these next few days, Wednesday to Sunday, or Thursday to Sunday, that is, of Combine testing. We'll be tweeting all about it. So, come give us a follow. Once again, that's at FatherSonPacker. We also tweet out when we have new episodes out. Stats that we find interesting when we're doing, research for these episodes, articles we find interesting, and content from other Packers content creators. One-stop shopping for everything Titletown, roster moves, coach moves, retweets around that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then subscribe to us on your podcast platform of choice. So that's Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify. We can put all our episodes out on YouTube. We'll be doing an episode every single week over the off season, talking about the draft, talking about free agency, talking about training camp, mini camp, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So don't tune that dial. And then on Twitter, we'll be doing mock draft Mondays every single Monday. So, come interact with us, leave us a comment, let us know what you think. But yeah, thanks so much for listening. We'll be right back with you next week. And until next time, go Pack Go.
Go Pack Go.